in in Thailand, where I first trained a lifetime ago, I just realized that I'm almost 52, and I was 24 when I joined a monastery in Thailand, and so it's more than a lifetime ago. And in the Ajahn Chah tradition, when a person gives a Dharma talk, they don't plan it, they don't write it. Um, One is meant to speak from the heart and from one's practice. And that used to annoy me sometimes because people would ramble. But now I've come to appreciate it. And to hear the same things over and over, it used to annoy me. And now I appreciate it. For example, the precepts, how this practice, that tripod of sila, samadhi, and panya, and sila being conduct, virtue, integrity, and samadhi, cultivating the inner life, meditation, mindfulness with a big M, and wisdom, the ability to see the way things are, and also the intellectual side of the practice, the scriptures. I'm in a quiet mood today, and so we'll see where it goes. And just when I was cooking my mushroom soup, I was listening to Krista Tippett, her podcast on being, interviewing a woman who's written about wintering and how when winter comes, the time to quiet down and, passages and so on. Like, yeah, that resonates. And feeling nostalgic for Minnesota where the snow would fall and everything quiets down. Not feeling nostalgic for driving there because that used to scare me a lot. And as we welcome the light again, it's this opportunity to reflect. Tomorrow I'm giving a talk to a corporate group, which I don't do very often. And they've asked me to talk on reflection. And so the images that have come is how to use that word, reflection as, so maybe I'll rehearse with you. Maybe I'll break the rule so that I'm ready for the corporates tomorrow. Reflection is a mirror. You show up in the mirror, it doesn't change. It's just there. And how to train the mind so that when something happens, we're not judging or interpreting. That can be really tricky. When I trained as a teacher, we had to go and look at playgrounds and just write what we saw, because a teacher would say, that kid is being disrespectful. Like, well, what does disrespectful mean? Okay, that kid raised his voice and he made a face. Maybe he raised his voice because he was hungry and something had happened at home. It had nothing to do with disrespect. And so when one reflects and thinks of a mirror, when something happens, do not interject yourself so quickly. It can be quite challenging. How about reflection as pausing and, let's say looking at, I'm holding one of my, I collect these spheres. This is garnet, it's quite heavy. Some of them are very light. And so if I hold this and then turn it around, reflect as means of looking at something from different angles. The old Indian story of the elephant. It is found in Hindu scriptures and it's found in Buddhist scriptures, where the teacher goes, okay, go find an elephant. And I'm sorry if you've heard of this 1,000 times. And the guy goes, yep, the elephant is really similar to a snake. It's like, I said, yep. Oh, the elephant is like this big wall. The elephant is like a trunk and so on. It's like, okay, what is going on? Well, the person only touched the tail of the elephant and then reported what the elephant is like. Only touched the body and then said it's like a wall. Only touched the legs and said it was like a trunk and so on. And sometimes we can have a life where, again, we don't have all the information. And as human beings, we don't have full information about ourselves. Something that was useful to me when I was young was the window with the 4 window panes. And this is how you get to know about yourself through this window. And the first quadrant is what you know about yourself and what other people know about yourself. The color of your shirt, maybe your name, your daily life. So everybody knows about that and you know about that. And then there's the things that only you know about yourself. Your secrets, how you use your toilet paper after you poop. Nobody needs to know that except yourself. Right? Your private life. And then there's the side that others know about you and you don't know. That's your blind spots. I just figure I didn't know that I have this habit of not closing jars. So my husband shook the salad dressing and he went everywhere. He goes, "Why do you close the jars?" I was like, "Oh, I guess I don't do that." I didn't know. It's unintentional. And then there's the side, the last quadrant, which is the things that other people don't know about you and you don't know about yourself. Why you dream what you dream, your unconscious, karma. We don't know what cell number 3,400,722 is doing in your liver. There's these things happening inside of your body, dying, reproducing, fighting. There are cells in your body fighting disease. And we don't know what they're doing. So as you reflect on imponderables, we don't know why were we born into that family. Some people know, they say they know. And when you look at a year, if we look at the calendar of St. Gregory, which is the one we're using right now, the Gregorian calendar, what has happened? The theme that they gave us as teacher was queer as F. So I took it to mean queer as fabulous. And, how do you deal with a pandemic, with work, as a queer person, as opposed to a non-queer person? Sometimes it's not relevant at all. Sometimes it is. So looking back at, this year, what has happened, some people experienced it better than other years. I may feel a little bit guilty about saying because other people have been suffering during the pandemic. So reflecting on how it's happened, and the other thing that can help is perspective. Where are you looking at this? There was this teenage girl who made a video, I think, out of a contest, just to prove that the pitch of a honking car, and depending on where you were on the road or above the car, the actual pitch sounded different. The honk is the same, but where, how long, like depending on where you are, the pitch will change. And so as you experience your life, what labels are you giving yourself to your experience? Another is full of analogies, metaphors, is when you put the glasses on. If the glasses are cloudy, the whole world is cloudy. As Ajahn Chah used to say, and I love to repeat this almost in every Dharma talk, or at least that's my perception. Ajahn Chah, who was Ajahn Sumedho's teacher, Ajahn Viradhammo was my teacher's teacher. If your purse has dog shit, the whole world smells like dog shit. And figuring that out, right? Like, what are we carrying that is coloring our world? And when Brahma Sahampati asks the Buddha to teach, in the legends, in the stories, in the tradition, Lord Brahma goes to Siddhartha and says, please teach, because there are people who have little dust in their eyes. And the Buddha says, okay. Because the story says that the Buddha had already decided that he wasn't going to teach. And what was the noble truth? Hey, they're suffering. The most mundane, most boring thing that everybody experiences. Queen Elizabeth, Beyonce, every day. Every single day of every single human being, that which is difficult to withstand happens. Dukkha, that which is difficult to withstand. And the second noble truth is like, hey, I don't want it to be like this right now. The 12 nidanas sound very complicated. It's the paticca samuppada, which is the 12 links of dependent origination. Dependent on this, this happens, and it's the explanation of suffering. And it can be so complicated, but basically, what it's saying is, I have an eye, and there's an eye object, and then something happens. And if I don't like it, and I want it to be something else, a cycle starts called dukkha. If at some point you break that cycle, you break any of those, then you have, you end birth, sickness, old age, and death. What does that mean? Because the Dhamma is deathless. And I was just like, what is that? Deathless, timeless. Time doesn't exist. The wise ones have been telling this for thousands of years. And now finally, European-based cultures have said, oh yeah, time and space. But we're filled with clocks that have beginning, middle, and end. The earth is rotating, so you have a clock of one day, and it goes around the sun, and that's a clock. And then we have a birth, and we have this. And if we get lost in the clock and just focus on everyday life, and we could lose that timelessness aspect. It's funny that even though I've been meditating since I was 16 years old, some of the insights have come in the most unlikely places. So that meditation is not just in your cushion, as they say. But I remember being in, crowded BART train station. It's like, oh, insight. So to reflect on what it means to be in the present moment for you. What does that mean? As we welcome back the light, right? As we now, we're going to say it's 2022 as opposed to 2021. People sometimes talk about having goals and aspirations, right? New resolutions. And they can be helpful, but they can also be sources of shame. Ooh, I wanted to do this. I wanted to, keep a diary and write 20 minutes every morning. And then April 27th comes along and you're like, oh, I haven't been writing as much. So I like more the idea of aditana in Pali, in the Pali tradition. Aditana, it is a determination. And, it can come out of curiosity. Sometimes it also just comes. Like, for example, I love cheese so much that right now I'm kind of like putting cheese to the side. And it's a really gentle aditana. I'm like, I'm going to experiment because, cheese has a very addictive substance in it that your brain is like, I want more. So it's a physical thing. By the way, desire is fine. Desire is not the second noble truth. It's attachment to desire. So my aditana with cheese is like, fasting from it can be really useful. So being a monk, 24-year-old male bodies are not designed to, only eat once a day, and no sex, right? No masturbation, no flirting, no handling of money, because money can give you so much freedom. So most of my 20s, I couldn't touch money. And so that fasting from that gave me some perspective. And some people ask me, well, why did you leave? I just respond, well, why aren't you a monk? That's a very rare, weird thing to do. If I sometimes I tell people, if I hadn't left, I would be the most senior Spanish-speaking monk in the world. So I used to fantasize, like, what would that be like to be some kind of famous monk traveling to Argentina and then, Spain, giving talks. What's the point of being a famous teacher or an author? You can be a really fancy talker or author, but what is the present moment? Like I'm so sincerely interested in that third noble truth, Nirodha. Enlightenment, Nibbana, actually is described as when the ashes have stopped burning. Which, of course, in the Western tradition, out of the ashes, the phoenix comes, which Jesus Christ in the resurrection, for about 300 years, they connected it to the phoenix. Just like, you're suffering. In AA, I understand. They talk about hitting bottom. So when you hit something, what is the reflection that comes out of understanding your suffering? When you have this insight, or where you understand a way that you're behaving and then you see it, it's like, oh. See, I was crossing the corner one day when I'm like, I am not doing silent treatments anymore. Because that's what my family did to punish people or to gain power or to, I'm going to give you a silent treatment and a cold shoulder. And I just remember I just crossed the street and I'm like, I am done. And it just came out of nowhere, It's called grace. And many times when you practice, you're cultivating. You put the tomato seed and you don't know if a bird is going to come and eat it or if it's going to rain or not, or whether you're going to have water. You're just planting the seed, getting the soil. And then I love that translation of bhavana, of cultivation. Because you do what you do and then the world does what it does. And the tools that you have for that gardening is this noble eightfold path. I find it extremely elegant. I always say it's in the Ayurvedic tradition, right? There's a disease and the cause of the disease and the prognosis and then the treatment. So the Four Noble Truths are presented in that Ayurvedic thing. But, and then you have this Noble Eightfold Path broken into three parts where, you have the wisdom, intellectual part, you have the head, then you have the body, the right speech and the right livelihood, and then you have the spirit, which is mindfulness, the moment where awareness is what awareness is, and there's no longer a Nils. It's like, oh, it's cloudy. That. And as I look at my life, when there's been weird moments where, something intense is happening and presence has been there, I'm like, oh, this is the fruit of my practice, that I can be present for this. And when I do stupid things, like not putting the lid on the ketchup bottle, or the other thing apparently I don't close the cupboards all the way through. Like the cabinets, I just kind of leave them open, and it also annoys my husband. I'm a high school teacher. My students find some of the things annoying. Like, it's a personality. I was talking to my sister yesterday and I was explaining what tile does, these things that you can put on your keys and on your things to forget. And she goes, oh my God, for my kind of mind, I would love to have that. She's in El Salvador. I would love to have it like that. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that you have the same mind that I do. You know, we leave stuff around. And so I can say like, oh, I'm a Dharma teacher, or, I've been practicing for, I don't know, what's 52 minus 16? That's how long I've been practicing. There's no diploma for the Dharma. Well, there are. I mean, you can get university degrees or trainings and get certificates. I mean, you can get a PhD in divinity. It doesn't make you Christ-like. So yeah, it's a time to reflect and understand what that reflection is. And so for me, the first discourse of the Buddha has been a beautiful framework on how to reflect. That the Four Noble Truths as a very useful tool for reflection, so that I can be happy. I finish a lot of my talks. I'm co-leader of the People of Color Sangha in San Francisco, and a lot of my talks finish with, every time you're happy, every time you work towards your happiness, you're honoring your ancestors. And for us, our queer ancestors, we're standing on their shoulders so that I can hold my husband's hand here. I'm in the Castro right now. I live here. I walk 3 blocks and I can see the blood of Harvey Milk on his suit. They have it right there in the museum. And I've seen it a few times, but the last time I was there, it really hit me. Like, you go to the airport and you see his name and you see a statue, but I'm like, that's his blood. And do you think Harvey Milk would be happy if you were all depressed? No, every time we feel joy, every time we come out, every time that we live our lives with integrity, we are honoring Harvey Milk and every other unnamed person. Imagine all those gay women who were nuns. They didn't have any other options, so they would end up in monasteries, but they got educated. All the trans people that have fought. Something happened in my life that was quite curious. The day that marriage equality became a law in the United States, the Pride Parade in San Salvador was happening. And I happened to be in El Salvador. So the Dykes on Bikes go in there and they're on bicycles. And then the leather people come in and they're kind of like, they had made like, it was like this homemade little leather things. And, it was like this little parade and they're holding rainbow flags. And then I looked around and it was all working class people. You could tell, that the middle classes and the upper classes are hiding in their own little gay worlds. But the people getting the rights are always trans, fabulous, working class people in El Salvador. And to reflect that when we're happy, we are also giving hope to young queer people to say it's possible. And as we suffer, then we have the reflection of, what can I learn from this? Because dukkha is what happens. That's the human realm. I did a whole talk on cosmology. I found cosmology incredibly interesting. There's 31 realms in Buddhism. And we're 5th from the bottom. We have the worst hells, the animals, the hungry ghosts. Then we have humans, and then all sorts of angels until you get to the gods. And in Buddhist lore, it says the most fortunate birth is the human birth, because you have enough suffering and enough pleasure.